I think one of the misnomers, I mean, there were, when I ran Waitrose, I think it had 72,000 people, more profitable, have higher productivity, lower staff turnover, lower sick absence, and they are going to be more successful than their peers. This person is a flight risk because of the way they've answered the questions, i.e., they're going to leave. Some managers don't perhaps want to share because they think that that's giving them some kind of power and control. Management layers being taken out, and so the spans of control are just huge. But if the spans of control are huge, how can you take a personal interest in something?
You say that 70% of Gen Z say they would quit their job if they weren't happy.
So I'll share with you a personal story. I used to say to my wife,
Being responsible, managed and led thousands of people across your career. What's the difference between management and leadership?
what sacrifices are you prepared to make? I had a young family, I didn't see much of them, and I hugely regret it now.
My next guest has recently released a book entitled Happy Economics. In the book, he draws a direct line between happy workplace environments, worker productivity, extra discretionary effort, growth, and revenue acquisition. It's a fascinating book, but also one I feel is very, very important. Work can be a source of great joy, great nourishment, and great meaning for people, but it can also be a source of some misery and occasionally even some suffering sometimes. But in this book, Lord Mark Price draws a direct line between productivity, growth, worker satisfaction, and happiness. Why did you decide to write this book, Mark?
Well, I have to go back to the start of my business career, really. So I read archaeology and ancient history at university. I was a mad keen golfer. I did a diving course in my last year at university, and I was going to be a marine archaeologist, or I was going to be a pro golfer. But my dear old dad said, get a proper job. So I applied for a few jobs, and I decided that I'd go and work for the John Lewis Partnership on their graduate trainee program. And I started on the John Lewis side rather than the Waitrose side, where I ended my career with the John Lewis Partnership. And on my first day, the then managing director of the department store in Southampton said to me and the four other graduates that joined that day, the supreme purpose of the John Lewis Partnership is the happiness of the people that work here. And that was set out by the chap that founded the company almost 100 years before I joined. And he had this really simple idea, Conor. He reckoned that if his people were happy, they'd stay longer. He wouldn't have to recruit people all the time. There'd be less sick absence. If people stuck with him, training would stick. So training costs weren't wasted on people coming and going. He reckoned as a consequence, customers would get better service. Therefore, he would have a better business. And over the long term, he'd do well. And the John Lewis department stores and Waitrose have been around a long time now. So on day one in that organization, I started a 34-year journey there, working out what does it mean to be happy at work. And for the last 10 years, I ran Waitrose supermarkets. For the last 3, I was also deputy chairman. And after I'd left and I had a brief stint in government, in UK government, I decided what I wanted to do was to build a website which is called Workle, where any individual in the world could go along, they could take a really simple test to see if they're happy at work or not. And based on that test, we'd give them advice of what they could do to be happier and get more enjoyment from their working life. And not long after I did that, I started being approached by companies who said, look, can you work with us? So wind on from 2017 to where we are today. We now work with 1,000 companies. 10,000 individuals every week go to take the Workall Happy at Work test. And we run Best Place to Work awards. So we run them for the Sunday Times in Ireland. We run them for the Sunday Times in the UK. We run them in the UAE, South Africa, Philippines, Australia, and increasingly around the world. And what that meant, Conor, is that I built up this massive amount of experience in thinking about workplace happiness and what drives it, and do you get commercial benefits? But also I'd got this huge database at Workall. So the reason I wrote Happy Economics is I wanted to share not only what it is that I think creates workplace happiness, but also to qualitatively show how you get improved results. So, what impact does it have on staff turnover, on productivity, on sickness, and on commercial performance? So, that's what the book's all about. My journey now over 40 odd years to understand workplace happiness, but also then to explain in the book what drives it and then what are the results of having it.
And earlier in the book, you referenced the fact you were either working or consulting with the Cameron government on the happiness index, and something happened to the happiness index, right? Can you recount what happened there?
Yeah, so I was actually running Waitrose at the time, and I got an approach from David Cameron to say that he was setting up a group because he wanted to look at national happiness as a measure. A number of other countries already have this. So the Nordics do work in this area, Sweden, but other countries as well start looking at national happiness as an index. So he invited me onto this group to look at it. My focus was obviously on workplace happiness. Rather than general happiness, but the group lasted for about a year. He got quite a lot of criticism for it. I mean, we were moving in the UK into that time into a period of austerity after the financial crisis, and so we kind of got swept away a bit. But the work that I did on workplace happiness sort of remained as part of certainly my thinking, but also more broadly thinking about can you drive productivity improvements from things other than investment in infrastructure or technology? My view very strongly is yes, you can. And I know that a number of other leading academics have picked that up as well as being something to think about.
What
There are two professors I work with at Oxford University, both of whom are looking at this space about what's the link between workplace happiness and commercial performance.
um I think didn't he dispense with the concept of happiness index? He didn't like the name, and they changed it to happy engagement or something like that, wasn't it?
No, it was more that kind of other things came along, and he started
Mm,
talking about the big society. So
mm,
he changed it from being a happiness index into talking about the big society, and the big society was his idea where everybody should be involved in volunteering or improving society in some way. So it kind of morphed into to something different. One of the challenges of the word happiness is that for a lot of people it's a bit nebulous and a bit fluffy.
mm,
Whereas what I did and what that group did was to define it. How do you define happiness? What does it mean in the context of work? And to be honest, the thinking around happiness goes back to Socrates and Aristotle over 2,000 years. So they started to define what happiness was, and they started to say, every individual is driven by the pursuit of their own personal happiness, and every action of every individual is driven by their desire for happiness. So even if somebody's mean to somebody, they're mean because they think it's going to make them happy being mean. And both of those philosophers a long time ago said that it's absolutely legitimate for every human to want to be happy and to seek happiness in their lives. So thinking around happiness goes back a long way. It's kind of the 1960s and all of that sort of hippie happy stuff has made people a bit wary. But I think that happiness is a great description because if you think about I give the example in the book, the analogy in the book. If you've got a sports coach and he's working, say, with a golfer, he might say to the golfer, "Were you happy with that putt?" But what he's really asking is a far more complex question about did you read the putt? Did you hit it the right way? Did you hit it out of the middle of the club face? Um, and all of those things have a bearing on whether or not you make the putt. But the opening conversation is all around, were you happy with the putt? Were you happy with the way you played today? Or were you happy with that meal? So commonly we use the word happy to describe at the first instance how we feel about something. We're either happy or we're not happy. But then we'll always have, were you happy with your meal? No, not really. Well, tell me why. This wasn't properly cooked, or it was cold, or it was the other. And so what I spent 30 years doing is defining what does happiness mean? What does it really mean? So I like the phrase because everybody understands it. I feel happy in my job. I'm not happy in my job. What I try to do then, or what Workle tries to do then, is to distill down to, yeah, but what is it you're not happy about? And then how can we help you improve? And then through that improvement, you're going to get more and the company's going to get more. So what all of our research says is that people who are happy in their jobs are paid more, are more likely to be promoted, are less likely to have any kind of mental well-being issues, and are just generally happier doing the job they're doing. For the company, what we know is that organizations with high levels of employee happiness, as I define it and describe it, are going to be more profitable, have higher productivity, lower staff turnover, lower sick absence, and they are going to be more successful than their peers who have workers who are less happy. And the way that I like to talk to people about it is to say, every day when you go into work, as a commercial organization, even as a public sector organization, you are competing against somebody. And you will be successful if you can get your people to go the extra mile, if they give more discretionary effort, if they work harder. So, what are you doing to ensure that your people are giving more than your competitor? Because ultimately, no matter what your strategy is, if your strategy is about better pricing or better quality or greater efficiency, whatever it's about, it needs people to deliver it. So, are your people better at doing that? And those organizations with the most engaged people, the happiest people, they achieve more. There's a report at the beginning of this year from Gallup, and they reckon that the cost to the global economy of people who weren't happy and engaged in their job, giving it their all, was actually around £9 trillion. I mean, it's just a huge amount of money. And in any organization, you get a bunch of people who are really committed, working hard, pulling all the stops out, doing everything they can, and you get another group who aren't. So what we try to do is identify for that group that aren't, why aren't they? What is it that's not making them fully committed? How can we help them? And then ultimately, if we can't help them in that company, how do we help them find a job in another company where they're going to do better? So everything we do is driven by a view around improving things for the individual, but also improving things for organizations.
One of the lines earlier in the book, which really jumped out, was relating to Gen Z and the ever evolving, ever changing world of work. You say that 70% of Gen Z say they would quit their job if they weren't happy, and that by 2030, 30% of the workforce will be Gen Z. What are they looking for? What are they expecting from work? And what has changed across the generations, do you think? Have expectations changed and why? I mean, I know that's a very big question there. But what's your perspective on that, on those figures?
So I think that my generation, I'm in my 60s now, my generation, when they went into work, thought that work was work and you do it and it work pays your bills. Work, gives you a life outside of work. I think increasingly that's changed and people look for work to have more purpose, more meaning, more enjoyment, and it has to be something more than just paying the bills. So I think there has been that shift over the 40 odd years that I'm in work. And now, when people are coming into the workforce, Gen Z, but also millennials, they're looking for something different. They're looking for something that's more fulfilling. And if they don't get it, they move. They're more likely to move. So I think that that's the thing that's driven people's attitude to just staying in the job because they're paid, and you grind it out. And people saying, "Well, there's loads of jobs out there. If I'm not in one I don't enjoy, I'll go somewhere else."
Do you think is it possible that it's, as the economies are, I mean, relatively successful and we're experiencing plenty of growth, that what we desire from and what we expect, like you said, from work is growing as well? So you would have had lots more menial jobs back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, post World War II, lots of people doing industrial work. We came out of the industrial age. But as the knowledge economy jobs grow across society, that there seems to be there just seems to be different expectations, like you touched on. And if companies want to get ahead of the curve on these changing, they on this changing environment, they will have to, in a competitive space, they will have to offer more, right? What can they offer Gen Z? What can they offer younger employees right now? What can they do you think?
So in the book, what I set out are the 6 things that drive employee happiness. And some people might think it's about, free pizza or free beers on a Friday night. I mean, as nice as they may be, that's not what really drives employee happiness. So what I discovered over 4 decades and through research at university and elsewhere is that 6 things really drive employee happiness. And it doesn't matter what your age they are, these are consistent to all age groups, but different ones have a different level of emphasis for the different groups. So the first is reward and recognition. So people want to feel that they've been fairly paid for the job that they're doing. People don't look at a star footballer and say they're getting paid 10 million a year and I'm getting paid 30,000 a year. That's not fair. What they do is they look at people who are doing a similar job to them and say, am I being fairly paid against somebody who's doing the same job as me? So on pay, you have to pay fairly. So we look at pay, but then more important to driving happiness at work is recognition. Have you been told you're doing a good job? Have you been given constructive feedback on how you might improve and how you might grow? So there's a lot about recognition that drives happiness at work. And that doesn't matter if you're 50, 30, or 21. It doesn't matter. You want to be told that you've done something well and thank you very much. The second area, Conor, is information sharing. And there are 2 things that are important in information sharing. One, has somebody given you the information you need to do your job effectively? Or have you been, as some might say, thrown in at the deep end? You've been asked to go and deal with something. You haven't had the training. So training is really important. But the other thing that's important in terms of information is having the context to do your job. Do I know why I'm doing this? Do I know what the company is doing? Do I know where the company is going? Do I understand my role within it? The third area is all about empowerment. And by empowerment, what I mean is, are my views heard? Are they listened to? Do people respect me? Am I allowed to get on and do the job? Because if you have those things, if you allow somebody to get on and do the job and demonstrate their skills, then you can reward them for that. But also, if you allow somebody to get on and they don't perhaps get it right, then there's an opportunity to better inform them, better train them, and they can grow and develop. So empowerment is the third. The fourth is about well-being, and well-being breaks into 3 areas: financial well-being, physical well-being, and mental well-being. And the shorthand for that is, does my manager and does this organization genuinely care about me? Do they have my best interest at heart? The fifth area is all about feeling a sense of pride. So, do I feel proud of the job that I'm doing? Have I been given a context for the job that I'm doing? So, has my manager made me feel that what I'm doing is really important to the success of this organization? And I feel proud not only of the organization, but the job I'm doing in this organization. And then the sixth, is all around career development. And there are 2 things here that are very important. One is, am I being developed? And that's particularly important for Gen Z and millennials who are starting out in their careers. So have they joined a company, they've never been to the office, they're doing work from their bedroom, nobody's ever talking to them, and they don't feel that they're being developed or they're growing? And secondly, what relations do I have with my line manager? So people who have a good relationship with their line manager always do better. They're happier. So it's those 6 things that drive happiness in work, and it's universal. It's universal to country, it's universal to organization, it's universal to age group, ethnicity, gender, pay and recognition, information, empowerment, well-being, sense of pride, and career development. If a company or organization, public sector, private sector, gets those right, they get high levels of happiness, high levels of engagement, and as a consequence, lower staff turnover, lower sick absence, higher productivity, and higher profitability. So all of my research in Workall shows that's the case, as well as everything I learned when I was running Waitrose and in the John Lewis Partnership.
You mentioned a couple of things that were really, really interesting there that jumped out to me. One was information sharing, but early in that piece, you mentioned extra discretionary effort. Can we just define what that is again for everybody listening?
Yeah, it's the extra that somebody gives. So, for any of your listeners who play sports, there's probably one day you go and play whatever game you love, and you put your heart and soul into it. You give it everything. Another day you go and play, and you kind of, you do enough. You go through the motions. Great managers, great coaches get their people to give more all the time, every day. They feel that energy from the manager, the coach, from the other people that are around them. So what we measure at Workall is the extra discretionary effort that people give to an organization. And that will dictate whether the organization does better than their competitors or less well than their competitors. If you've got an organization where 80% of your people are going the extra mile every day, giving more, really committed to make sure that things are flying, then you're going to do better than a company next door where only 40% of people are doing that and 60% of people aren't doing that. And so we measure that. I mean, it's pretty simple. I've talked about the six things that create happiness at work, create that extra engagement, whether you score highly on those or not. We then have linked that over the years to staff turnover and sick absence. So we work with companies on new starter and exit surveys. So we've got 8 years of data of how people answer our questions if they're about to leave or if they've just started, and we can see the difference between the two. So we can start to flag this person is a flight risk because of the way they've answered the questions, i.e., they're going to leave you. And so if you go to Workall and you look at the 100,000 organizations that are listed on the world's happiest list, what you'll see there is data on happiness. You'll see data for that company against the global score, against their industry, but you'll also see metrics like confidence in management, flight risk, percentage of people who are going to leave that company, well-being risk, the number of people there that have got some kind of well-being risk. You'll see an inclusivity index. So because 10,000 people a week go to our site and they fill in all this data about where they work and their company, what we're able to do is to relate that then to data on that company, on staff turnover, sick absence, productivity, and there's a link. We know that those organizations with the happiest people get the best commercial results. And so in the book, Happy Economics, I set all of that out. I set out how we measure it. I set out the results. I show the correlation between sectors, but also individual businesses where an organization has a higher level of workplace happiness, engagement, whatever you want to call it, than another, and then commercially how that's benefited them. So extra discretionary effort, EDE, is all about what more you're getting from your people than your competitor and how that translates into either operational efficiency or productivity or profit, depending on what kind of organization you're in.
You mentioned in the book, you talk about hierarchies, and that hierarchies can be problematic when it comes to happiness in an organization. What's your I have a perspective on this in terms of information sharing, in that it gets trapped at certain levels in an organization, right? And you've spoken about information sharing, and you've mentioned the reference to the fact that sometimes management leadership can withhold information with a view to linking it with power, and the feeling of power. Can you expand on that, Lord Price, that concept?
Yeah, of course. So there's a phrase that people often use, isn't there? Knowledge is power. And so people, not some people, some managers don't perhaps want to share because they think that that's giving them some kind of power and control. Whereas in my experience, the more you can share, the better. So if the organization's having a tough time, what do you do? Do you hold on to that and not share it with people and let them go about? So in a way, what you're doing is you're protecting them from bad news. Or do you want to share it and say, we're all in this together. Here are some of the challenges we're facing. We've either got to increase sales or we've got to find a way of being more cost efficient or whatever we choose to do. So my view, and through my career, I've always taken the view that you should share as much information as you possibly can to give people a context for the jobs they're doing. The other thing that I always felt is that I was serving the people that reported to me rather than they were serving me. So I was trying to help them be the best that they could be rather than them trying to help me be the best I could be. But perversely, by doing that, it doesn't work in that way. So if your mindset is that what I'm here to do is to help the people that report to me be the best they can possibly be, and thinking about those six things is the way you get there, and part of that is sharing knowledge, then I know that they're going to perform and their performance will look great on our department or on our business. The Roman army were fantastically good at this from my studies of the Roman army at university. I mean, they were very clear about the maximum number of soldiers that a centurion could manage or a legionary could manage, etc. And it was all based on how many people can you manage and understand and sort of care about in the broadest sense before that starts to break down. And so I've always been a great believer that, management spans should probably be no more than 10. I mean, if you're a brilliant manager, maybe you can get your arms around 15 people, but I mean, that's a heck of a stretch. And one of the things that I've seen over the last 10 years or so in business is management layers being taken out. And so the spans of control are just huge. But if the spans of control are huge, how can you take a personal interest in somebody, in the results they're getting, in the way they're being developed, in the way that they're gaining more experience? You can't coach that many people. And so I think that one of the things that most organizations can do is look at spans of control. What tends to happen is if you take those spans out, in the short term, it takes a while for people to adjust, but then natural leaders spring up who actually aren't management, but people go to say, how am I doing? They have a cup of coffee and say, oh, you could have done that better, or you could do this. So it's become a natural process in some organizations away from management. Some might say, actually, that's quite a good thing. But if you want to have a hierarchy, I think there are a number of things that you need to think about. One is span of control. How many people employees can somebody manage and give them really good feedback and give them that kind of information sharing and knowledge. And if you think about that, then you get into the right kind of conversations about leadership. What is leadership? Which is another topic. And I found that organizations work better when they've been very thoughtful about those spans of control and how people are managed.
There's another thing about information sharing that I think is maybe on recognized or unspoken about it, and it's the effect of gossip in an organization, right? Gossip doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you are more forthcoming with information, you reduce the chances of people gossiping, and gossiping can be corrosive in an organization. So I think the book really reinforces the point of share as much as is viable and reasonable, and give staff the information that helps them do their job and satisfies their curiosity, if you like, and it can inhibit the gossiping stuff that can go on.
Well, I think that's right, and the church is pretty good in terms of having a service every week and a celebration every quarter. I mean, what we do here at Workle, which is kind of what I've kind of copied through my partnership career in John Lewis and Waitrose, is that we have a weekly meeting. So on a Monday morning, everybody attends a weekly meeting at 10:30 when we talk about the week that's passed and what we've got in the week ahead. Every month we have an all hands, so everybody comes into the business for an afternoon, and in that we talk about projects and things that we're either developing or things that we have developed. And then every week on a Friday, we send out a round robin, a bulletin, and that lists all the successes in the week and things we're working on and the things that people should know. And you have to sign that. You have to sign that to say that you've read it and you understand it. So by doing that, it forces the management into a structure that says we're going to communicate every week, last week and the week ahead. Every week we're going to write it down on a piece of paper and make sure that people see it and sign it. And then once a month, we're going to have a much larger time together, 2-3 hours, when we're going to talk in more detail about all the work that goes on and every department presents. So by thinking about it in that kind of structural way, you've laid the right foundations. Then after that, it's making sure that you as a management team are always open to questions. So if somebody comes up to you and says, why are we doing this? Or, could we do that? You listen, you take the time to listen and make sure that people feel involved. And as you said, Conor, what that does then is it stops the gossip. There isn't space for it because people have got the chance, regularly to say, is this true or is that happening? Um, and also on top of that, we have management meetings. So we have two management meetings a week, one at the start of the week, one at the end of the week to make sure all the management are aligned and individual management meetings. So communication is so important and, communication to share information as well as communication to agree on, projects and the way forward.
Mark, you've been responsible, managed, and led thousands of people across your career. What's the difference between management and leadership?
That's a that's a very good question. For me, management is about the deployment of resources. So it's the effective deployment of people, money onto the projects that you want to run. So good managers are given a project, they're given a budget, they're given a team, and they effectively manage that budget and that team to get results done. Leadership is different, and anybody can be a leader. It doesn't have to be the manager. But leadership is about, for me, three things. One, having a very clear plan that's well communicated. So this is where we're going, and people all understand why we're going there and how we're going to do it. The second great bit of leadership is every single person feels involved and committed in executing that plan. So I know my role. I know that I'm important if this plan is going to work, and everybody is made to feel important and part of the mission. And then the last is just being ruthlessly and endlessly optimistic. So there are always going to be bumps in the road. And if you can be optimistic and say to everybody, look, we're going to get there, we've made great progress, we need to keep going. I find that optimists are the best leaders. And, you see it in people all around the world. Winston Churchill, in the face of the most difficult circumstances, was always optimistic that, we will win, we will get through. You have to keep people's spirits up. So for me, leadership is about those things, a clear plan of where you're going. And that plan is really well communicated and endlessly communicated. Secondly, you've made everybody feel part of that plan. Everybody counts. And the third thing is you're continually optimistic about the plan and where you're going. I've worked with lots of leaders in politics, in business, in charities, and for me, they all have those traits. That's very different from giving somebody a task and saying, we need to build this and we need to build it in 3 months' time. And you've got this budget and you've got these people resources, structure how you're going to do it and deliver it. But having said that, good managers are also good leaders. They understand those three things and they can communicate to that team. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. You're all really important in achieving it. And we are going to get there, no matter the bumps in the road. So, managers can be leaders too.
You started your career at a relatively junior managerial level and rose pretty much to the C-suite, the highest levels of C-suite, right? How impactful is status in terms of happiness, right? So there would have been incremental status gains, if you like, as you're rising up the corporate ladder with compensatory remuneration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's your perspective on that rise up the ladder? Does it affect happiness? Does it diminish happiness? Or is it what's going on there, do you think?
So I'll share with you a personal story. I used to say to my wife, when I get to be a managing director of a John Lewis department store, I'll be really happy. I'll be really satisfied. And I can remember having the conversation with her once when I was lying in the bath. And at the time, I think I was a department manager in the Southampton John Lewis. And I worked really hard. And I did get to be a managing director at the age of 30, I think it was, of the John Lewis in High Wycombe. And I can remember the first morning I walked in. I was in charge of a business that had a turnover of 40, 50 million. There were 1,500 people that worked there, 2,000 people that worked there. And I had my own little space when I arrived in the car park. And I walked in and I had my very first meeting with the senior team there and the department managers. And I went back to my office and I sat in my chair. And my predecessor had left a note on the table for me, a very nice man called Peter Miller. And he just put, "Congratulations, Mark, really well deserved. And I hope you enjoyed the role." And it had been everything that I'd kind of wanted, really, to run a John Lewis department store. I'd always seen that as being, a fantastic thing to achieve. And I was happy. I was genuinely happy. And you know what, Connor? 3 days later, I sat at that desk and I thought, what's next?
Mm.
I think I could run a bigger department store. And that happened. They got me to go and open a bigger department store. And I did that. And I thought, I can do this. What's next? And in that moment, or in that time, what I realized, and it goes back, funny enough, to Socrates and Aristotle, that if you're promoted, or if you buy a new car, or if you get a new house, or if you buy yourself a new pair of trousers, it gives you fleeting happiness. It's not lasting. So you pat yourself on the back, you say, this is great, well done. But what you will discover is that does not bring lasting happiness. It brings, immediate happiness in that it panders to your ego. What Aristotle said is that lasting happiness comes from altruism. It's from the journey. It's through helping others. It's through building things that last. Those are the things that bring you happiness. So I get huge happiness now through building Workle and trying to help, hopefully, hundreds of millions of people around the world have a happier working life, to enjoy it more, and to help companies and organizations achieve more. I love the journey that I'm on with the team here. We've now got 55 people who work in the office here, and then we've got people who work in places around the world. And that makes me happy, seeing them grow, building the team, enjoying the journey with them, the bumps and the highlights. So I've come to realize over the course of time, and I can say this with the luxury of having been successful in business, um, that that will only give you fleeting happiness and pleasure. Helping other people, growing yourself, helping other people grow, that's what gives you lasting happiness and joy.
Um, in 2020, as president of the Chartered Management Institute, you discovered that 82% of managers in the UK firms had no management training. Okay, so two questions here. How is that possible? A, and B, what does that indicate about the level of attention paid to management? And, I mean, managers, they deserve better, right? They deserve a little bit more support. I mean, how can you do a role like that? That was a shocking statistic that jumped out from the book. What's your perspective on that, Mark?
Well, yeah, I feel for the people that are put in a position of managing people and have had no formal training to do it. Some will be naturally capable, they'll be empathetic and whatever, but they've had no training. So why does it happen? There are two reasons it seems to happen. Either A, people have been promoted because they have a technical qualification. They have become an accountant, they have become a lawyer, they have become a qualified consultant. And then because they have been successful and they have qualified, all of a sudden there are people that are reporting to them. Or alternatively, they're just experienced. They've been around for a long time. They've been doing the job for 10 years. And in the end, somebody said, well, you know everything there is to know about this job. You're going to be promoted and you're going to be the manager. But what they don't get then is the training and the time to think about, how do you get the best from a team? How do you get a team to knit together? How do you get a team to produce great results? How do you stop the infighting, or as you were saying earlier, the gossiping? How do you do all these things? And so no two individuals are the same, and no two individuals can ever be managed in the same way. And so, getting people to understand how you get the best from a team, how you build a great team, they are critically important things. But as I said, the CMI research said 82% of people get no formal management training. And so they're put in positions where they're asked to look after a team, and they do their best.
So the exceptional individual contributor is often ambitious and is obviously promoted into the role. That's the pathway. I guess the message as well as, I mean, with the CMI, the work that the CMI doing, there are pathways and there are avenues out there available to organizations to help facilitate the growth of developing and young managers also. Um, okay, so one of the things that has changed recently in society is obviously a lot of people are working from home. What's your perspective on how that has affected happiness?
Well, our research says that people who work part of the time in the office and part of the time at home are happiest. They have an average happiness score, I think it's a 74% off the top of my head. Those people who are at home all the time, their average happiness scores tends to be about 71, 72. And those people who can't work from home, their average happiness tends to be about 69%. So there's a very clear set of results on people who are mixed home and office, people who are only home, and people who are only office. There are pros and cons, and it's different for every age group. I often say, Conor, that if you've got your head in the oven and your feet in the fridge, you're an average temperature, but you're not in good shape. The reality is that it's different for every age group. So for younger people, Gen Z, maybe millennials, what they're missing out on if they don't come into the office is the sense of learning through osmosis, community, career development. All of those things are really, really important. Um, Also, you have to recognize that a lot of people can't work from home. If you work in a shop or if you work in a restaurant, you can't homework. You might if you're the kind of area manager or something, but I mean, even then you need to go into the places. So there is a real split between job roles in terms of what you can do working from home and what you can't. But all of our evidence says that a hybrid model is the best because people get to work from home and the freedom and flexibility that creates, but also they do want to have that sense of community, sense of collaboration, career development, which you are going to get more of if you're in an office working environment.
Do you find that there are, in your research and your work, that there are certain departments that tend to score higher on happiness versus others? I'm thinking in terms of customer facing roles versus perhaps finance roles versus engineering roles. Are there areas within the organization leadership have to be mindful of that could be susceptible to lower rates of happiness?
Yeah, definitely, Conor. So if you go to Workle and you go to the world's happiest workplace list, there are 100,000 organizations on there, and you can filter those organizations by company name if you want to look at the particular company, but you can filter them by country, you can filter them by industry. And that shows a very clear picture that the highest are people who work in tech, marketing is very high, not for profit is very high. Amongst the lowest are things like retail, hospitality, defense. They all score towards the bottom, but there are 26 sectors. So you definitely see differences by sector. But then similarly within an organization, you'll see the same. You'll see that people who work in tech or in head office are happier than people who work in warehousing or happier than people who might work in retail or in the restaurant. And so what we try to do is work with organizations. We now work with 1,000 organizations to identify where within their organizations they have pockets of happiness and pockets of unhappiness, and why is that, and what can be done to improve it. But yes, there are huge differences even within companies, and even if you were just to take the retail sector, there are some that are very good and there's some that are less good, and that all comes down to how good are the management at implementing the 6 things that I've talked about. Where that's done really well, they get much higher scores than others.
What impact do you think? I know this might be outside of your remit, but I'll ask it out of curiosity anyway. AI and robots. Have you thought about the impact that level of technology could have on improving environments, or is there any work or any research that you're aware of, or what's your perspective on the oncoming tech revolution?
Well, ever since I've been in work, there's been a tech revolution. I mean, when I started in John Lewis, we had the first IBM computers, and they were going to take away everybody's jobs, and then electronic tills, and they were going to take away everybody's jobs, and it's gone on. Online was going to take away everybody's jobs, but there are more people working in retail now than there were before. So I'm not convinced in the argument that these are going to take jobs away. I think what will happen is I think that elements of jobs which are laborious could well be taken away. But I think it will just spawn new jobs and different jobs. Um, One of the things that is noticeable in all the work that we do is the whole AI and tech thing is firing a desire in people who are in their 40s, 50s to be retrained, to learn new skills, because they can see that perhaps some of the jobs they're doing are going to be taken by AI or robots or whatever. Although, gosh, there are so many robots in so many businesses already, but they see that, and so this desire to be retrained, reskilled is definitely, I think, at the forefront of a lot of thinking for organizations who've got older workforces and see this new technology coming in. But I've not really seen anything in AI yet that makes me believe that certainly in the very short term, there's going to be mass redundancy. What I see is AI helping people with taking minutes or collating information or producing a document more quickly on request or writing a report, or it's all the kinds of things that you do as part of your job but isn't all of your job. And it's the interpretation that's so important. You can write a report on the pros and cons of investing in a piece of machinery, but ultimately you've got to make a decision, and then you've got to set up a project team, and then you've got to da da da. So kind of AI isn't quite there on that. So I do think, as we're seeing with a whole host of things. Can people even remember before Google, and you could Google stuff and it was so easy? But now you don't think, oh well, Google's going to lose people their jobs. Probably the encyclopedia salesmen have all gone, but um, it just helps you to do things more quickly. If you're writing a report, you just Google, give me all the information on AI and its future, and it will do that for you. So we've had so many technological advances over the last 20 years or so, but all they've done is they've enhanced people's ability to do their job. They've not necessarily taken away huge swathes of jobs, but we've seen a whole host of new things start to appear. So new jobs, new industries. So I, I'm broadly positive about the future, and I do take the bit about reskilling, and I do think that's a very real need for people, particularly people who are more mature in terms of their experience. But I'm not sitting here worrying about AI, you know, taking thousands and hundreds of millions of jobs in the short term.
One of the things when I was reading the book, and it's a wonderful book, and I'd encourage everybody to read it, Happy Economics, is your career trajectory and your career growth, right? There, you have risen, right? You've traversed all the levels all the way up to the C-suite, right? What advice would you have for a young man, a young woman entering at a junior manager level, graduate trainee level, who's ambitious, determined, and driven, and wants to, I suppose, follow in Mark Price's footsteps? What would you say? What would you say to a young Mark Price starting again?
So I can tell you exactly what I used to say to all the graduates that started when I was running Waitrose and before that in John Lewis. And I used to say this to them: if you want to be the CEO, uh, the boss of a company, normally CEOs get 5 years as the CEO. Not some might get 10 years, but 10 years is a good stint of time. So the first thing I say to them is, when do you want that 10 years? Do you want it when you're 40, 50. And most of them sit back and reflect and think, well, maybe if I became the big boss C-suite in my 40s, that would be good. And I say to them, yeah, that's probably about right, because what you've got sitting ahead of you now is 20 years of people who've got the same ambitions. And what they're doing now is working hard to try and fulfill their ambition. So 20 years is a good time frame. And then I say to them, so what are you going to do for the next 20 years? How are you going to think about developing your career? How are you going to think about the departments you want to learn in, the industries you want to go to, and how you develop? So much of your early business career is about gaining a suite of knowledge. And I was really lucky. I worked, although I worked for John Lewis and Waitrose, there's so many different jobs. You know, there's logistics, there's operations, there's finance, there's, you know, HR. There's so many different disciplines. And so you can learn an awful lot by staying in one company if you're with a really big business like John Lewis and Waitrose. But other people may well choose to move to different industries to get different experience. So the first thing I would say to them is, if you do have that ambition, when do you want to fulfill it? And therefore, what are you going to do between now and then to put you in the best place to get it? The other really, really big decisions that people have to make is, how much time do you genuinely want to put in? And what sacrifices are you prepared to make? I had a young family, I didn't see much of them, and I hugely regret it now, because the job that I had it's not a 9 to 5 job. You're kind of always on, you're always wired. You know, the work-life balance thing, I mean, is great in theory, and I'm better at it now than I used to be. But if you genuinely want to be the best of the best, if there are only 100 FTSE 100 companies in the UK and only 100 are CEOs, how many, you know, there's 20 million people working. I mean, the odds of getting it are remarkably small. Therefore, not only do you have to be hugely impressive, but gosh, you've got to work. And it's that trade-off. Do you want to do that? It's like the best footballers in the world. You know, Ronaldo, you know, he used to stay hours and hours after training had finished just to kick a football. You know, you'll hear the same stories about people like Paul Gascoigne. They were just obsessive about trying to be the best they could be at what they did. They thought, well, if so-and-so trains for 2 hours, I'm going to train for 3 hours because I want to be better. And it's the same in any line of work, whether you're a professional sports person or whether you're in whatever job you're doing. If you want to be the best that you can be, then that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy. And that takes me back to where I started from. To do that, you've got to love what you do. You've got to be genuinely happy. You've got to want to put in the time and effort. Along the path, some people who start out saying, I'm really ambitious, I really want to do this, they recognize that perhaps they're not. They do want to have a different life. You know, my dad was one of the most contented people I've ever met in my life. He had a one-man sole trader wholesale business. He used to buy crisps and biscuits from the big manufacturers, and he used to sell them on to small shops and schools. And he was really happy doing that. He never wanted a bigger business. He did the days that he did. We had lots of time together as a family. The trade-offs were that, you know, we had a camper van and we went away in a camper van for long weekends. We never had, you know, any kind of anything you describe as a flash holiday. When things weren't going too well, my mum used to chase us around the house with a slipper, telling us to put the lights out, you know, but he made a choice, and I really respect his choice. And, you know, as I say, he was an incredibly content man because, you know, for him, what was important was his family and, you know, his religious beliefs and other things that were really important. So work was something that he did. I know he enjoyed his job, but, you know, he didn't knock himself out. He'd be the first to admit that. And so we've all got to come to a realization about that. And when you're 21, 22 going into a job, I don't think you've really decided yet how much you really want to put in, how much of yourself you want to give to really be the best at something, and to understand all aspects of everything you'll need to understand if you're going to run a large corporate. Along the journey, people drop out, and they don't drop out because they're not good enough. They drop out because they've made different life choices and they've decided they want to really enjoy their job. but they want to balance it with doing other things, and that's completely legitimate. My personal view is they still should enjoy their job and should still be happy. So, anybody sitting down, I give those two bits of advice to. I would say first and foremost, plan a route to get to whatever age you think is the right age for you to be the CEO and have the best chance of doing that. And that route needs to put you in the best place when you get to that interview, in terms of the experiences that you have and you've built. And the second thing, really ask yourself how much you really want to commit, and not commit for 1 year or 2 years, commit for 20 years. And then also for the 10 years that you're doing your CEO role. So, you are all out, all in for probably 30 years. So you've got to ask yourself, is that what you want and that what you want to do? And if you do, great. If you don't, equally great. You've made a decision about what work plays. You want to enjoy it. You want to have to get the best from it, but you're perhaps not prepared to do what others are prepared to do.
I felt when I was reading about your journey that you would also have to be have exceptional people skills and be an exceptional politician, for want of a better word, right? To make that, to rise and to understand, like, skills and competency are one thing; they're absolutely essential. But being able to negotiate and work with people of various different types and personalities, that is surely just as essential, right?
No. So you're right. So yes, if you're going to be a leader, you've not only got to have good IQ, you've got to have good EQ, because you've got to get the best from people. So as I was saying earlier, there were 10 people that I managed on the Waitrose board. Well, 9, 10 I managed on the Waitrose board. Every one of them were different, different backgrounds, different experiences, different schooling, and they would all need something different. So for each of them, I would approach conversations with them in a different way. And afterwards, I'd always sit back and think, did that meeting or conversation go as well as I'd hoped it would in terms of, alignment or getting something done? So no, you've got to have that. I think one of the misnomers, when I ran Waitrose, I think it had 72,000 people. I can't manage 72,000 people. Nobody can. What I can do is, a video every month saying this is where we're going. And when I meet people, when I visited the shops, I could talk to them and take a genuine interest in them and their views. So, I could connect like that. But really, I was managing 9 people. And those 9 people were managing another 9 people. And those 9 people and so it escalates down through the business. So what was important to me is, how am I looking after those 9 people? What support are they getting from me to be able to do their jobs? What training are they getting? What coaching are they getting? And then what you hope is that in the way you look after them, they will look after their people. So it cascades right down through the business. There are other big things you can do around policy. It's our policy not to do this, or it is our policy to do that. So you can build a framework, but by and large, what's important is the people that day to day you're looking after. I had this thing, Conor, where I wrote on a piece of paper, and I always had it with me, the 15 people in the business that I felt it was really important that I had a close relationship. So board members, but then a number of people who were not board, but either looked after a lot of people or were critical to the company's success. So there'd be people on there like the head of operations, so not the retail director, but the person who looked after customer and operations. And I'd have we had at the time a couple of big warehouses, so they'd be on my list. And what I would do is every week I'd make a point of talking to all 15, not just hello, but actually having a proper conversation. And I can't tell you how hard that is to do. And what I was often doing on a Friday, when I always used to go out and visit the shops when I was running Waitrose, I'd be on the phone to the remainder of that list saying, I haven't had a chance to catch up with you this week. How's it gone? What's going on? Da-di-da-di-da. And every week I would make a point of either having a face-to-face meeting or a telephone call with those 15. By doing that, I felt that I kept in touch with them, but also they knew that I was genuinely interested in what they're doing. And I think that good managers do that all the time. They're thinking, have I spoken to everybody under my charge this week? Do I know how they really are? Do I know if they're on track? Do I know if they need some help or not? So EQ, understanding people, making sure you communicate with them is very important. And for any of your listeners,
Aspiring CEOs.
yeah, aspiring CEOs, make a list of all the people that you think are very important to talk to every week. And I guarantee you, if you put 10 on your list, you will find it really challenging to have a proper conversation with all 10. I had 15 and gosh, it was tough. In fact, even on Saturdays, I used to phone around the shops just to see how people were. But it takes a lot of commitment to do it.
What does the future hold for Lord Mark Price?
Oh, I'm really focused on building Workle into a global platform. So we trade now in 6 countries. I'm hoping it's nearer 20 by the end of 2025. We get, as I said, about 10,000 people every week coming to take the Workle Happy at Work test. I hope that in a year's time, that's 40, 50,000 every week coming to take the test. We link that to jobs, so we've got 5 million jobs on the site. So what I want to do is help more people find jobs where they'll be happiest. But what I want to do, my great ambition in the time I've got left on Earth, is to help more people understand how happy they are in work, to be happier in work, to find jobs where they're going to be happy, and to make sure that as best as I can, my team can do, we spread that to as many continents as we possibly can. We trade on 3 continents now. My hope is that we're in 6 continents by the end of next year. And then I write. I love to write. So Happy Economics I published this year. Next year I've got a book for individuals, I hope, on how individuals can be happier at work. The Happy Economics is really for managers, about how to get the best from their team. And then I write children's books, so which I do for fun. So I've had one published, and I've got a series which I hope will come out. So to see work will grow into something that can help people globally is my first ambition, and then secondly, be quite nice to finish off my children's book series.
Mark, I wish you every success in both of those journeys. And thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure, fascinating, listening to your journey. And yeah, thank you so much. Happy Economics, everybody. I'll put a link in the description to it. Thank you so much, Mark.
You're very welcome, Conor. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you.